Hey everyone, I'm Kevin with Victory 4x4. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through how to install our roof rack on this 2022 Toyota Tundra. So we're going to get things started by assembling the rack. You can see here we've kind of got everything laid out that you're going to receive: front and rear fairings, crossbars, side rails, and the appropriate mounting brackets. We'll begin by installing these crossbars to the side rails. Now, each of your crossbars is going to have a couple slots milled in one end. Those are going to be to slide T-nuts into these channels so you can mount your accessories later on. We typically just make sure those are facing up and all the way to one side. We usually pick the driver's side, but whatever works for you. Now, to secure the crossbar to the side rail, you're going to want to find the 1/4-20 button head bolts and corresponding washers in your hardware pack. With each of these, as they go into the crossbars, we do recommend just a little bit of anti-seize lubricant on each bolt. And then you can stand up your side rail. You'll be installing these into those horizontal slots, and then just kind of grab the crossbar, line these up, and start threading those bolts in by hand. Once you have both bolts started, you can grab a 5/32 hex and then just kind of center the crossbars on the slots for now and tighten these in place. Now you can repeat that same process all the way down one side rail, then just jump to the other side and do the same thing. Now we're going to move on to installing the mounts. You're going to have 4 of these mounts. They are different front and rear, and that's going to be easily identifiable with an F and an R cut into the part number here on the mount. They're also going to have arrows cut into each mount. Those will face forward towards the front of the rack or the front of the vehicle. When you install these to the side rails, you're going to use the same 1/4-20 button head bolts with washers that we used for the crossbars. However, this time you're going to back them up with 1/4-20 serrated flange nuts. So identify your mount, go ahead and slide it down inside of this side rail, and then just install each mounting fastener. Once you have that hardware in place, I'm just going to push this mount all the way down. That way it holds the rack up as high as possible when it goes on the roof of the vehicle, and then we'll just kind of lightly snug them up for now. Now we're just going to repeat that same process here on the rear, just using the mount identified by an R. Then just repeat that same process for the remaining mounts over on the other side. Now we're going to move to the front fairing. So for this, you're going to begin by finding the provided edge lock trim to install along this front radiused edge. When you're installing this, the overall length isn't super critical. You just want to make sure that you get this kind of covering just past each of these points so that it can protect the roof surface anywhere along this front edge. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm just going to place it about 2 inches roughly past that first point and begin pressing it in place. Once you get that leading edge started, you can just kind of work your way a couple inches at a time and press this right up on to the front of the fairing. Once you work your way all the way across and to this remaining point, you can kind of just mark the edge with your thumb about 2 inches past that one. Then go ahead and grab something sharp. A set of tin snips like I have here works really well, and kind of cut off the remaining amount. Now this is like an aluminum impregnated edge, so if you get any of this protruding from the end, just go ahead and safely peel that out of there, throw it away so that it's not going to contact the fairing or the paint on the vehicle once this is installed, and then just finish pushing this edge lock trim up onto the fairing. Now with the edge trim in place, you'll simply take the fairing, slide it down between these 2 side rails, and you'll fasten that again using that same 1/4-20 button head hardware. After you get all the hardware started, we're just going to go ahead and pull this all the way back to the highest point in the slots and just kind of snug it in place for now. That'll kind of just get it up out of the way while we're setting the rack up on the vehicle, and then you'll do final adjustments to that at the end. Now on the rear fairing, you're just going to take the remaining cut-off section of edge trim that you have left over from the front, kind of just loosely fold it in half here, and then you're going to cut this into 2 equal parts. Again, just clean up the edges if necessary, and you're going to install one of each of these out on either end of this fairing to cover each of these points, and then leave the extra length running inward towards the center of the vehicle. Once both of those pieces are in place, it should look about like the one I have here, and then this will just install the same way as that front fairing between these 2 side rails, and again, just raise it up and snug it in place. Now that we have the rack assembled, you can grab a friend to help you carefully place this up on the roof of the vehicle. Now with the rack placed up here loosely on the roof of the vehicle, we need to locate it both side to side and front to rear so we can drill the mounting holes. So I started by removing this rear crossbar. You guys shouldn't need to do that. I just did it so you can have a better visual in here while we're getting this marked out and drilled. We're basically going to be measuring from the back edge of this rear mount to the front edge of this black trim here at the rear corner of the roof. So just place your tape measure tight here to the back of this rear mount, down at the mounting surface, measure straight back to the front edge of that black trim, and what you're going to be looking for is to be in between 8 5/8 and 8 3/4 inches there. We're going to give you a pretty tight window for placing these mounts up here, just to know you get this rack placed properly on the roof of the vehicle. Once you have the rack placed properly, you can come in being careful not to move it, and just using a Sharpie, go ahead and mark the center of each of these mounting holes. Now I'm going to get these rears fully mounted in place before moving on to the front. That way these can hold the rack secure from front to rear before we move on. Now just in case I didn't mention it before, you'll want to also make sure you're paying attention to the gap here between the inside edge of this mount and the edge of the roof, making sure that's even on both the driver and passenger side as well before you mark these out. Then you can go ahead and temporarily remove this mount. I've just placed a microfiber towel kind of folded up here at the back edge to help support this while that mounts out of the way and keep the rack up off the roof. Then using the Sharpie marks we made when lining this up, we can center punch and begin drilling these mounting holes. Now you'll be drilling your holes out to accept the M6 riv nuts provided in your hardware pack. For that, you're going to want to start with a small pilot bit. I believe I have an 1/8 inch here, and then you can work your way on up. I have a 3/16, quarter, 5/16, all the way on up to a 25/64. That's going to be the final drill size that is critical for these riv nuts to set properly once installed. As you can kind of see on each of these, we're going to recommend that you not drill this without a drill stop added to each of these drill bits. Highly recommend having these so that you don't drill too deep, potentially into the headliner or further down into the vehicle, and damage anything inside of there. Now if you've never used these drill stops before, they're fairly simple. You're just going to find the closest size to that 23/64 bit that we'll be using. Slide it up no more than 1/2 inch. That should be plenty to get down through this material, but also keep you safe from going into that headliner surface. And then using the set screw typically provided with these, you can go ahead and tighten that up to the side of the bit. If you don't have a set of these and you need to pick them up for this installation, you can get them anywhere online. Of course, Amazon, any of your big local hardware stores are likely going to have them as well. They're not too expensive, so just play it safe and get those for this part of the install. Now lastly, before you drill, just so that you don't get any of these metal shavings down inside of the vehicle where they'd be laying on top of the headliner and such, we are going to recommend grabbing a shop vac. This is where an extra set of hands may help out, just so you can keep 2 hands on the drill, but whatever you're comfortable with so that you can safely get these drilled and keep everything clean. So now that we have those pilot holes drilled, I've switched out to my 23/64, and we're going to follow that same procedure, just carefully drilling these out, being sure to use a drill stop and running the shop vac to keep things clean. So in drilling these, we have found that some of the material underneath here is some sort of like hardened steel, making it not the easiest thing in the world to drill. So a couple tips we can give you along the way here to make this as easy as possible is, one, not only to use that 1/8 inch pilot bit, but you can also step up using a couple different sizes, just making sure that you obviously don't go over that 23/64 and you finish out with that to accept your rib nut. So another would be to just make sure that you have some good quality drill bits, not the cheapest thing you can find or something because you think you're only going to use them one time for this job. And then just a little bit of cut lubricant of some sort. Obviously you don't want to put too much on because you don't want it dripping down inside of these holes, just like we're trying to keep the shavings out of there. So maybe just a real light coating on the end of each drill bit as you're drilling these holes. So with all that being said, this can be done with relative ease. However, it's just going to take you a little bit of time as you work through it to get all these holes drilled. After you do have the holes opened up to 23/64, you're going to find that the rib nut doesn't drop all the way down in there and seat nice and tight against the metal because of this top little flange on it. So you'll want to take either a 1/2 inch drill bit like I have here, or like this center style drill, which I just like because it kind of drops down into the hole and gives it a little bit of a guide. And you're just gonna drill enough that you're taking kind of just this foam sealant type material and opening it up to look like the one here in the back. So that's really all there is to it. You can then get that out of the way. You don't want to go any further down into the metal because then your rib nuts aren't going to seat and grab properly. Now we're ready to install the rib nuts into each of these holes. So a couple different ways you can do this. We're going to provide you with this small tool setup. This is perfectly capable of setting each of these rib nuts in place. What it is a long M6 bolt to thread into the rib nut out on this end. You're going to stack it with a flat washer here, the high nut here that should slide loose on the bolt, followed by the serrated washer and then the rib nut itself. Go ahead and kind of hand tighten this, and then you can drop it down into the hole and push it down tight. Once you feel everything get nice and tight, go ahead and just back that bolt out. Make sure you get that little serrated washer back out of here, and then just double check to make sure that you got that fully seated. Now another way you could get these installed would be using a rib nut installation tool like the one I have here. These are readily available out on the market. There's all different types. Some of them are pneumatic, some of them like this would be powered by a drill. The gist of it is you thread one of your rib nuts here on the end. Using the power of a drill on this end, you can hold the tool tight and kind of accomplish the same thing we did with our tool. The drill will pull this in and seat it against the metal down there in the roof. They are a good thing to have and pick up if you do plan to run a lot more accessories on your truck that might include the installation of more of these rib nuts. So once you have both sets of rib nuts set in the rear mounts, you can reinstall the mounts kind of loosely at this time. You can lightly snug these up. That's just going to hold the rack from front to rear on the vehicle when we're drilling the front mounts. So those front mounts are going to follow the exact same installation process as far as getting the rib nuts set, drilling things out. Again, just take your time, make sure you're stepping up with a few different size drill bits to get those holes drilled as easily as possible. And then after you have both front mounts set in place as well, we can begin the final installation of the mounts in the rack. So for the final installation of these mounts, I'm going to kind of just pick a corner to work on. I'm coming back, of course, to the first corner here at the rear where I started. I'm going to pull this mount free so that we can both add sealant as well as the supplied spacers to go in place underneath this mount. So now that we're installing these for the final time, you'll want to find the 1/2 inch diameter spacers that are in your bolt pack. These will be placed down in each of these holes before the mount is bolted on. We're going to be using this Permatex Ultra Black as our sealant. We find this works really well to both keep water and stuff out over time, but also stay just a little bit flexible for any minute movement in the rack. Basically what we're going to do here is apply a nice generous ring of that down in this hole. You can then take the spacer and kind of gently press that down in. After that, you'll kind of apply another generous bead around both the outside edge of the spacer and then making sure you get just a little bit on top as well. And then do the same thing here in this back hole. So basically what we're looking to do here is fill that entire cavity and any small space around the spacer to prevent any water getting in there over time. Once you have a good amount of that RTV down there on the roof, you can bring your mount back in here, get things lined up. You'll again take just a little bit more once you have things lined up and kind of fill that hole. Build up just a small mound there. This way your bolt is going to have to both pass through it as it goes into the mount, and then it'll have just a little bit to kind of squish out and seal nicely to the top of the mount as well. Now you'll want to be generous with this so that you know you get a good adequate seal. Just don't go too crazy so you don't wind up with a huge mess up here. If you do, you can always kind of wipe this up. It can be just a little bit difficult or messy to do without kind of just smearing it. Just be sure when you're installing these bolts into the top of the mount as well that you're using one of the small 1/4 inch washers from the bolt pack on those M6 button heads. Then while you have this hardware started but still loose, you can reinstall your side rail to roof rack mounting hardware. And once you have that loosely in place, you can use a 4mm hex to come in here and tighten these up. Once you've done that, you should wind up with something that looks about like I have here, where you can see a little bit of the RTV coming out of the sides. You know, you got a nice adequate seal there. Then you can go repeat that process one at a time to install the remaining mounts. Now, if you remove this crossbar as well, like I did along the way, go ahead and reinstall that as you're getting these mounts tight as well. At this point, you should have all of your mounts tight up there on the roof. You're gonna wanna come back and loosen this side rail hardware just a little bit so that you will have the adjustability here to set your side rail height. Just a couple things to pay attention to while you're doing this. One, of course, the visual aspect. You want this to look good, so you're going to want to adjust this so that it's kind of running parallel to the roof line and has the appropriate gap basically just to your visual preference. Now with that being said, we do still want you to be able to retain the use of your sunroof with this rack in place. And if you're going to do that, you are likely going to have to run this rack either close to or as high as possible here on these side rails and side mounts. So you can go ahead and adjust that up and then very carefully open that sunroof to check your clearance there, making sure that you also account for having gear up there, whether it be a rooftop tent or whatever you're going to put in place, that may cause some minor flex or fluctuation in the height of those crossbars up there. So with ours, and you may or may not be able to see this very well on camera, it looks like the rear is just a little bit low. So I'm going to kind of just bump this up. Right here, I'm making the side rail about even with the bottom of the mount. And then using a 5/32 T-handle, I'm just going to tighten these up. So now I'll just step back and take a look at this, and if we like the way everything looks, we can come up here and tighten the front mounting hardware as well. Once you've tightened those, you can jump over to the other side and repeat that same process. Now the last thing you're going to do is adjust the height of both the front and rear fairings. So this is pretty self-explanatory. There's slots on the fairing. You just loosen up the side hardware and you can slide this up or down. Ideally, you're going to push it down tight to the roof, and that's going to prevent this from buffeting at all or any airflow underneath there to keep this nice and quiet as it rolls down the road. Now we do want to talk about and recommend some of this clear paint protection film. This we're going to ask you to put in place underneath any of this edge trim where it contacts the painted roof surface, both front and rear. just to prevent any scratching where it might collect any fine dust, dirt, or debris over time. So a brief explanation on how this goes on. You're just going to push this down as far as you can tight to the roof. Grab some painter's tape and just mark out roughly about 1/4 inch in front of that edge trim. Now once you've extended the tape all the way across the front, go ahead and take a Sharpie or a pen or something and mark where you want to stop this. Now you're going to want to go just a little bit past where the edge trim stops making contact with the roof. Usually that's about in line or just past kind of the points on the front edge of that fairing. After that, you can pull the front 2 bolts on each side and then just temporarily kind of flip this fairing back up and out of the way. Then you just want to be sure before you put this down that you clean this surface. We're just going to be using some simple glass cleaner, just something that's not going to leave a residue or any streaks behind. And then you're going to apply this a lot like you would any vinyl sticker or decal, just starting at the mark here on your tape. You can kind of peel the edge just a little bit to get started. And then ideally you're going to want to have some sort of vinyl applicator or something like I have here. Probably can be done with like a credit card or something as well, but this is going to work just a little bit better. And then you're just going to kind of follow your tape line all the way across. So I've kind of stuck that edge, and then just working a little bit at a time, I'll peel the backing and push this down again to follow the tape as I work my way across the front of the roof here. So as you work your way across, you're going to kind of get out here closer to your mark. Using that as a guide, you can go ahead and cut this off, which should be doable with just a sharp pair of scissors. And then just following the same process, you can complete this application. Now we flipped this back over. We made sure to reinstall the hardware out here on the side. Then we'll just push it down tight to the roof and tighten these bolts on each side of the vehicle. Again, this will be your 5/32 hex. With the front fairing tight, you can go back and adjust the rear. Now we're also going to recommend paint protection film back there. However, if you remember from earlier in the install, you're just going to have those couple short pieces of that edge trim back there. So you're really only going to need to apply a short strip on each side to protect the paint back there. Hey everyone, Kevin here with a quick update to this video. We've made some changes since the initial filming of this install, and we want to go over them with you real quick. So the first and biggest change is going to be the roof rack. Visually, you see here behind me is now our Evolution Series rack. That's what you're going to buy and that's what you're going to receive. It has the gray textured side plates or accent plates along the side, as well as a few other visual and performance changes. But this is essentially going to install the same way. So we're going to use the same install video. Obviously, just want to point out these key changes. In addition to that, we've made some small changes to the mount. So I have the front set of mounts here and the rear set of mounts here. You're going to follow along the part number on these and find the F to indicate front, and then these have forward facing arrows as well. So I have the right or passenger side mount here, driver side here. Round holes go down toward the roof, leaving the slotted holes to go up against the side rail. And then going to the rear mounts, you're going to look for the R at the end of the part number, and then same thing, round holes to the roof, slotted holes up to the side rail, and these are symmetric, so no arrows to worry about here. They can be installed on either side. So that's relatively minor in terms of changes and how they affect the actual install, but we felt it was worth pointing out to you. As always, you can check out the website for more information or call customer service with any questions.